saying to Chris, I think it makes more sense to let them hear the presentation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Thanks, Jackie.
Good evening. It is 5:30, so we're going to call the special meeting to order. Remind you to turn your cell phones to silent or vibrate. And then let's please all stand and do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Chris, would you take the roll, please?
Councilmember Dalby?
Here.
Councilmember Rowe?
Here.
Councilmember Stevens?
Here.
Councilmember Myers?
Here.
Councilmember Berg?
Here.
Mayor Lazio?
Here. Needed a motion for approval of tonight's agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Councilmember Dalby?
Yes.
Councilmember Rowe?
Yes.
Councilmember Stevens?
Yes.
Councilmember Myers?
Yes.
Councilmember Berg?
Yes.
I think at this time, I'm going to take a point of personal privilege and change the agenda order a little bit. I think it makes more sense to let us make some presentation to the audience. And then if any of you want to address the council or make any comments to the council, we'll give you a chance to do that. So at this point, I'd remind you, this is a special work session and we do want input from you, but I want to be sure that we keep this orderly and ask that you recognize yourself, name and address, where you're from, and what you want to comment about. And you'll need to be recognized by the chair before you begin speaking. So with that, I'll turn it over to our city administrator, Phil Rath. And Phil, if you would introduce our topic tonight.
I will do that. So tonight's work session is based on our discussion of code enforcement and nuisance abatement. One of the things I just wanted to mention is we're gonna start out with a overview of our current process. We've got a little slideshow of kind of how things work right now. This is not meant in any way to be critical of staff and the work that they do or what the city's approach has been. This is an opportunity for us to reflect upon the process, look at best practices in other communities as well. We want to focus on what's working that we should do more of, what hasn't been working so well that we can look to change, and hope to have a better overall process going forward. So I'm sure that everyone here has a story that they'd like to mention, to discuss, things that have been ongoing issues, whatever the case may be. This is an opportunity for us to hear those stories. Please don't have any expectation there's going to be any silver bullet answers tonight. This is the kind of the beginning of that conversation. We have very limited resources that are at our disposal, so we want to make sure that we're using those to the best of our ability going forward. So with that said, I'm going to turn this program over to Zach Simonson and let him take that on. I also want to introduce City Attorney Christine Stone, and is it Jenna? Olivia Brooks from Allers and Cooney, who are here to help with any legal questions, issues that we're looking at, what we can do, what we can't do, maybe help explain why things are done a certain way, process, timelines, those kinds of things. So I'll turn it over to Zach.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. And thank you to everyone here. I think it probably impresses on the necessity of having this meeting or the urgency of the topic, just that this is probably one of the biggest groups in the gallery I've seen at a council meeting for a little while. So we are having a conversation about code enforcement. I did prepare slides for at least this first part of it to kind of keep us on track and use that time. But my expectation was that it's a work session. It's an open conversation. Any of you should feel free to interrupt me. Anybody else in the staff that has more to add is going to do that as well. But we are going to talk about really briefly why we have a code enforcement program, who's involved on the city staff level with that program. And then when Phil got here, he kind of approaches every problem with those two questions that he already said, what's working that we should do more of, and what isn't working that we want to change. And that's the lens that we're going to apply to each of the things that we look at in this conversation tonight. We'll talk about how we can get the changes done that we want to make. So code enforcement is broken down into sort of three categories tonight. That's our nuisance code enforcement. That's everything in chapter 24 of the city code. Those are we'll define each of these a little further. Then there's the housing code enforcement. That's chapter 20. That's our derelict housing as well as our rental housing program. And then there's the new construction. That's any new building and remodeling, renovation, repair. We have a code enforcement program because there's health safety risks, life safety risks that come from some of these problems that we deal with. Derelict housing is dangerous. Some of these nuisance conditions are dangerous. And that's part of why we have a program. We also have a program because people in the community have the right to peaceful enjoyment of their property. And we want to secure that right by making sure that their neighborhood is habitable and hospitable. We also have a program because it improves property values. When you live next to one of these habitual code violators who has a yard full of junk motor vehicles, things like that, it's harder to sell your house. Your whole neighborhood is impacted by that. And we want to see those property values go up, not just for the quality of life and the wealth of our citizens, but also because it's going to help us with a lot of the problems that we have as a city financially. And finally, it's just that it contributes to the sense of pride, place, and identity that we have in our neighborhoods when people have a motivation to take care and take responsibility for their property. Our city attorneys prepared some discussion for something that's going to be kind of framing here, which is the role of personal property rights and how we enforce code enforcement.
Thanks, Zach. So just, whenever you're talking about property codes and code enforcement in general, sort of the big picture framework that cities are operating under is cities are able to exercise police powers, which ensure the health, safety, and general welfare of the community. And any private individual owns their property subject to those police powers. So the city has the right to sort of take action in furtherance of that police power. However, there are limitations on the police power that the city has. Obviously, a big one is the takings clause of the Constitution, the federal and Iowa Constitution. Private property cannot be taken for public purposes without just compensation being made. So there is sort of a line that, you can't cross. You can't deprive someone completely of all of the use of their property and not compensate them for that. So that's one of the big sort of factors to keep in mind. And then the other one is due process. So anytime that a city is taking action that's affecting someone's liberty or property interests, they are entitled to procedural due process rights. And if you'll advance to the next slide. And the Iowa Supreme Court has sort of clarified this, and what does that mean? Before a city can declare a property a nuisance and order its abatement, in a non-emergency situation, the city has to inform the property owner of the declaration that it is a nuisance. So there has to be a finding made that their property constitutes a nuisance. They have to inform the property owner of what they have to do to prevent the city from abating the nuisance at the owner's expense. And they have to provide the property owner with an opportunity to contest that nuisance determination. So they do have the right to a hearing whenever you're talking about nuisance abatement. And so those are, the factors that absolutely have to be followed anytime we're pursuing code enforcement, nuisance abatement. And nuisance abatement ranges from everything from tall grass to, a completely dilapidated house. So there's a range of what constitutes a nuisance. But even when we're dealing with tall grass, property owners are still entitled to these procedural rights. So that can be frustrating sometimes. People, often ask, well, why is it taking so long? Why can't you just come in and take care of this? People are entitled to enjoy their property, and whenever the city is kind of stepping over that line, they're entitled to due process. So again, the city's property, building, and nuisance codes are minimum standards that promote the health, safety, and welfare of the community. There are many opinions about what maybe should occur beyond that. But really, when we're talking about health, safety, and welfare of the community, it's the minimum code standards that protect life safety, that ensure, that citizens are able to enjoy their property and that their neighbor's property is not sort of detrimentally affecting them.
Thank you, Christine. I wanted to also mention here at the beginning that when we went through the comprehensive planning process, we identified that property maintenance and code enforcement is a critical priority for the city in that plan. And one thing that stood out to me going through the plan again, preparing for this, was when we asked as a survey question for the public input, what changes would increase quality of life in Ottumwa, and people could pick multiple of these different categories. And property maintenance stood out as the largest, the one that was selected the most by quite a bit. And that's above better K-12 education. That's above more things to do. So that told me that there were a lot of people that were concerned about this. And there are at least 4 items that are specifically related to code enforcement that were in the goals and action items that we set with that document as well. We'll move on here. So right now, our code enforcement on the city staff level, at least related to the specific nuisance, building, and housing code questions, is handled by our 2 building inspectors. They're both here tonight, Jake Rush and Jeff Hammond. And then our housing and code enforcement inspector, Jeremy Leip. And our 2 clerks are Kathy Shepard and Keely Johnson. And I think Keely's here as well. Those are the staff that work on this topic every day in these areas. That doesn't mean that there isn't a lot of other input from other people involved in the city staff. We collaborate, especially with the deputy fire chief, with the police department, all the time on coordinating our activities. But there are those that work in the building and code enforcement department every day on this issue. And so what they do are the inspection types that we already described. They do plan review. They maintain all the records and for case files, permit information. And then we also have a public communication and education role where we can help people to understand the complaint process and the requirements of the code. And we'll get into each of those elements a little bit tonight. And so I broke this up into sort of 4 areas: our nuisance code enforcement, our housing code enforcement, our new construction, and then that public communication area, because we have recommendations that relate to each of those. And in each of those areas, we want to ask the questions, what are we doing now that we want to keep doing, and what are the things that we want to change? So we have in our nuisance code inspections area, the process is like this. We get a complaint, or occasionally we've canvassed, we've gone out and we've identified on our own an issue. We have 1 full-time housing and code enforcement inspector, and then we have a seasonal inspector during the summer. So Jeremy is primarily the one person with 11,000 dwelling units in the city that deals with these nuisance complaints. The other 2 inspectors primarily do the housing code and building code inspection. So this is one person. He gets the complaint. When he's able to, he canvasses and identifies and generates his own cases. He does the initial inspection. He takes photos, he identifies what the violation is. It would be something in that chapter 24, either one of the enumerated things or just in general, whatever is injurious to the senses or an obstruction to the free use of property so as to essentially interfere with comfortable enjoyment of life and property by the public or the community is the code definition of a nuisance. So he identifies that issue and he sends the notice of violation with an expectation that the property owner will comply with abating that nuisance. So in this inspection level, what works? Our inspectors and our clerks have a good relationship. They have a good understanding of the code. They are putting in the hours every week and generating the cases. They're responding to every complaint. And our notices go out. We communicate clearly with the public, and we're proud of all of those things. And then we identify a few areas where we do want to make some changes. I sent our notice to our city attorneys, the typical notice that we would send out, and they identified some areas where we need to improve that notice so that the procedural due process is more clear, and so that we're setting the expectations better. We also have the great iWork permitting and code enforcement software, but when we implemented that, we didn't do enough one-on-one training with the inspectors, and so we have some opportunities to use that software more if we can develop a program around training on that. In relation to how we issue our notices, we could improve the process that we have for hearings to meet that procedural due process, and we have some recommendations about how to do that. Then there are a few areas in the code that we just need to make some changes to tighten things up so that we don't have things that fall through the cracks that we all think probably should be a nuisance, or we meant that to be included when we adopted the code, but it's a little bit outside of how it went. So with iWork, it's a great program. I've spoken with Edward about some technology improvements we can make to have the inspectors bring that technology into the field. Instead of going out, taking the photos, coming back, and then putting everything into iWork, we can have that whole system available with us in the field. This sort of came to me as a no-brainer when I was working with the deputy fire chief, and he's got this great kit where he prints out the inspection report right in the field, and then our guys are, scribbling out little handwritten notices that they hand over. And so when we're coordinating on an inspection, it looks just a little bit different. So we wanted to bring ourselves up to that 21st century level and give our inspectors the training that they need to feel confident using that, and then tracking and generating our cases and notices directly in iWork. And then also making better use of the public portal. Right now, you can go to ottumwapermits.com and you can actually see all of our code enforcement cases that are open and where they are in that process. But folks don't do that. And we can do a better job of making that information more useful and then making sure that people know how to use that information and how to get to it. As far as our hearings, the Iowa code does require that we give a notice with an opportunity for a hearing. Chapter 24 doesn't have a clear hearing process. And so we have suggested here adopting a change to that ordinance that would spell out the hearing process. My recommendation would be that property owners who object to the declaration that they have a public nuisance would have the right to a hearing with the department director, and then that decision could be appealed to the Board of Health. One thing that you'll see in some of these is that the staff recommendation involves bringing the Board of Health a little bit more into being involved in things, not just condemnations like the Board of Health does now, but bringing a few other items to that board as well. And I guess just for the sake of the audience who might not tune in every week, the Board of Health and the council are the same group of people. And then also just some code updates. Our junk motor vehicle code, we'd like to change the language of unlicensed to not displaying current license, because we do run into an issue where people just don't put the plates even though they have the plates on a vehicle, and that's been an issue. We also want to tighten the standard for what's inoperable and damaged. And we've discussed and we'd like to bring to the council for your consideration, including a vehicle that is not moved in 10 days. So then if we do give someone notice, the vehicle hasn't moved in 10 days, because you still have due process, you go out there and you can demonstrate, you can move the vehicle, you can show us that it still runs, but if the vehicle can't run, then that's an issue. And this comes from a lot of public concerns and public complaints that we've had where somebody might update the tags on something, they might not have flat tires, but that vehicle is junk. And so that's something that we'd like to address. We also know that the council passed an ordinance restricting parking in the front yard. It's not very clear in that ordinance whether parking in the side yard on a corner lot is parking in the front yard. And we'd like to clarify that with an ordinance change as well. Included in the packet, you might want to take some time with this, is a logic model for that notice program. Just sort of breaks down what goes into the process, what the different activities are, what can come out, and then what our sort of desired outcomes are, short-term, medium-term, and then sort of as a broad impact. And that'll be in the packet for several of these items if you want to take a look at that. And then on our enforcement level, we've so far discussed the hearings and the notices, but on the enforcement level, what the inspector does, the time has expired. Every week he pulls the ones that are due for recheck, and he goes out and he sees whether they've complied with the notice to abate. If that hasn't happened, then there are a few options that the inspector has some discretion to choose between. He could send a final notice, maybe because they've done some of the things that were expected of them. They picked up some things, but maybe it wasn't clear that they needed to go further, that actually those tires can't be out there either, that sort of thing. We can issue a citation, which is a civil citation filed with the court. And at that point, our city attorneys would handle that when the appearance date is. Those citations, when we file them, the first appearance is going to be 30 days later. So that's when you can see, okay, this case is going to start dragging out a lot longer than just 10 days or a week. And then we can also order an abatement action, and that's where we would have our cleanup contractor go out and pick up the trash. Sometimes we want to make sure that we have the issue the citation and get the order from the judge before we do that, because of the nature of the case or for a number of reasons. It has been our practice to not always do that. We've ordered the cleanup right away, and we've gotten garbage picked up. We've cut the grass. Those are things that we don't issue a citation for before we go out and we do them. And having that hearing process more clearly established, I think, would help us to satisfy the due process involved in doing it that way. And every single case that we have is open until resolved, and the department director does verify before any file's closed out. Right now, I get a stack of them every week, and I go through and I make sure that the issue's resolved before we sign off on filing those out. And one thing that does happen a lot, and we'll deal with a little bit later, is that problems can be resolved for a day or a week and then come back. And that, in the eyes of the public, often is no progress. And that's fair, because what you're used to is what's there all the time, which is the actual condition of there being an issue. We went and cleaned it up for a day. That doesn't make a big impact in the arc of how you've had to live in that area. So what works in the enforcement? Our cases are open until they're closed. Our attorneys win when they go to court. We are able to build the cases that they need to go and prove that the finding of the nuisance was correct, and we get the court order from the judge to go and abate that nuisance. And I believe that we treat all of our cases fairly and consistently. Our inspectors don't have a personal interest or a personal grudge in a certain type of enforcement or treating anybody a certain way. I do believe that we treat all of our cases fairly and consistently. And things that we would identify that we might want to change is we need to do something about case durations. And so a recommendation we'll have is to clarify an extension policy, put more of the burden of making the extension decision on the director than on the inspector, and have some shorter case durations. Also improving our penalty system, looking at what we can do about the citations versus the abatements, and then taking action with habitual offenders in that problem I described above. Right now, the extensions can cause the case duration to stretch for a long time. Some cases will require more time than others because of the nature of what they are. Some people are going to take more time because the problem got really, really bad, but they're willing to take care of it. They just need more time, and we can understand that. Some people, because of their ability, will take more time, and we can understand that. But we want to have the flexibility to react to that, but we also don't want people to just call and say, hey, I just need another 10 days, and then we just stamp that. We want to make sure that we see some reason for that extension so that we can shorten these case durations when we have to. And so we've described here a potential, not a this is how we want it. This is not necessarily a recommendation, but maybe the inspector has the discretion to grant a 10-day extension. The director can grant 2 more, at which point we've already extended 30 days. Then do we involve the Board of Health or someone else in any further extensions? And we also want to include a clear expectation in policy that extensions require progress made or good cause. There's a logic model for that as well. And then habitual offenders. We want to adopt a policy or make a change in ordinance and work together with our city attorneys to do that with a clear standard for what constitutes a habitual offender and then what the response is to that. We already have a pretty good policy of doing routine inspections until a pattern of violation is resolved rather than just an individual violation. Jeremy has a number of addresses that he goes to every couple weeks, regardless of whether he has a current violation at that property, just to make sure that we're on top of those situations. But how can we use the civil citation process or a durable court order or some sort of judgment to allow abatement activities on these habitually violating properties without going through the process of reopening a new violation, a new notice, and all of that. Try to speed up some of these processes and also change the behavior from the habit. And then our penalty process.
Exactly. Just real quick on the habitual offenders. I know at the nuisance abatement conference we went to a couple of years ago, that essentially that is legal, right? Or it sounded like other towns were doing that, and to kind of open it or keep it open.
Yeah.
For those, as opposed to how the process had been, right?
I think Christine might want to add to this too, but what I've seen in other cities is there's something in the code that says a certain number of violations in a certain period of time, so 3 or more in a year. You can identify somebody as violating the habitual offender part of the ordinance, and then you go to court and you ask for the judge to give an order that you just abate those violations on site. Is that similar to what you've seen, Christine?
I have seen that process used, and another process that I've used is, where you think a problem is going to continue to occur, is go to court, and through the court you can ask that they be enjoined from further violations. And so if they do continue to violate, you can go back to court, and at that point it's a contempt action. It's not a new citation, and contempt does carry the possibility for fines and jail time. So there's a couple of different ways to approach that, but yes, I have seen what Zach described used as well.
Thank you. And then just as far as the penalties conversation as well, our current civil citations, they do require the city to pay $95 in court costs up front. And at least in the past, we've had a limited ability to collect fines even after they are assessed. And as a result, we've found a limited deterrent effect. We want to work with the attorneys to improve the citation program or identify an alternative. We also want to make better use of the lis pendens process at the courthouse so that we can attach violations to a property. My understanding is that'll help us with resolving some of our issues with collecting these penalties. And then we also want to make better use of these judgments or consent agreements, like Christine said, so that violators could be held in contempt. And there's another model for that one as well to take a look at. So just to recap this first area, the nuisance code enforcement, and this is the biggest one, I promise. We're probably halfway through. But there are a number of things that do work, and I'm really proud of the work that the staff does. And it took a long time to get us where we're at, and there are still some areas that we can improve. Improving the hearing procedures and improving the extension process, making better use of our technology, looking at those penalties, and addressing the habitual violators. So we'll move on to the housing code section, unless anybody has more questions about this part of the nuisance presentation. So our housing code enforcement is our rental inspection program. All units have to be registered and inspected every 3 years, and the inspectors identify deficiencies on an inspection and provide 30 days to correct those deficiencies. Our derelict property program identifies housing code violations in any dwelling unit, rental or owner occupied or otherwise, and it's typically complaint driven. Occasionally, we'll also identify some of these cases by canvassing or on rental inspections themselves. This program, Jake and Jeremy, our building inspectors, primarily are involved in housing code inspections, Jake and Jeff are primarily involved in these, although Jeremy has done rental inspections and does do some of the rental inspections as well. And so if they do these derelict property inspections, they prepare a notice to correct. If that's not resolved, or if the issue is already very severe and requires a more immediate action, the inspector will placard the property as unfit for habitation, and the property owner must provide and follow a repair plan to cure all the deficiencies before the placard is released. Unresolved issues can result in condemnation or a filing under Iowa Code Section 657A, where we would try to take title to abandoned property. Our rental inspection program, a few things that work. The International Property Maintenance Code that we adopted a few years ago, I think is a lot better than the rental code that we had before that. Our inspectors are knowledgeable about the rental code. They've done hundreds of housing code inspections, and they're very capable at those. And we have a reputation, I believe, with being fair and upfront with landlords and tenants. What could change? We need to do better getting notice of change of ownership and local contact information from landlords. We need to include that in our billing that goes out every year so that we know when properties have changed ownership and so that we have someone in a locally that we can contact with each case. And we also want to discuss changing the frequency of inspections for units that have several violations. There we go. So the city code does require that sellers give notice of change of ownership. It also requires that they give local contact information. We haven't collected this very aggressively, and we need to make a policy change so that our rental permit bills or rental permit applications require this information and that we make sure to collect it. And then the inspection frequency, we do inspect every 3 years. What some cities do is they'll shorten that inspection to every year if a property has a certain number of deficiencies, and they'll continue that annual inspection for an additional fee until the property goes below having that whatever that number of violations is. And that's something that we want to look at. It's not something that we necessarily want to do, but we do get complaints from people. You're only there every 3 years. You don't see how bad it is. Oh, you give them an opportunity to fix it, but it goes back. So if there is a need for that, then we want to talk about what we could do in that area and if we should pursue that. And then our derelict property enforcement. What works is that our inspectors, again, are very knowledgeable about the housing code and our enforcement. The property maintenance code is good. Our attorneys are successful in the 657A cases, and we have a consistent number of properties that we do demolish, and we meet the goals of that program. We would like to, again, standardize our extension process on these cases so that they don't remain open for as long. We'd like to look at how we could get better notification about sale of these properties. And we want to also discuss, and this is a much bigger conversation than we'll have tonight, the incentives for improving properties so they don't become derelict. And that's a bigger part of our housing strategy in general. So again, similar to the nuisance changes, we would like to look at something where the director can grant extensions over a certain amount of time, but at a certain point, the Board of Health would also weigh in on some of these decisions to determine whether or not this is a case that needs to be brought to a close, or if there is good progress or good cause for that case to remain open as long as it has. We want to work with the city attorney so that we so that we can create an expectation and notice of sale. The sale of placarded properties is probably the #1 cause in extending case durations to a really long period of time. When you get a case that comes to you for condemnation and it's been open for 3 years, it's probably because that property sold 1 or 2 times. We're going to bring a case to the Board of Health next week, and that's going to be the case there. That property sold twice, and so it's been placarded since 2018, but each of those owners after the sale has had an opportunity to make improvements as well. And that stretches that case out for a long time, even though there's been no substantive improvement in that property since 2018. And so then this is the third and final area of inspections is the new construction inspections. This is where the inspectors receive a permit application. They review the plan and approve the application. The clerks receive the fees, file the records, and issue the permit. Permit schedules are the permittee's calls to schedule the required inspections, and the inspectors okay each phase of a project before issuing a final certificate of occupancy or a sign off on a final inspection. Our inspectors accurately review our plans and issue our permits. Our inspectors are available for inspections, even with limited notice. That's something that we've been very good at. Also, reviewing plans with limited notice. I think that we've done a very good job with that. We verify that new work is correct and meets the standard for safe development, and our iWork software has enabled the clerks to accurately calculate fees, keep permits and keep records and issue permits better than what we had before. This is actually a really good program in general. We thought hard about what we could do better here, and there were a couple of things that stood out. One is we could have better education about the code, especially for property for homeowners who they aren't going to go out and buy for $350 the International Residential Code. But if we can make that code more available, we can be available to answer questions. We can also make it available, then we can empower people to do work on their own. And I know that Councilman Dalby's expressed this idea before. How can we get those electronic code books out there in the hall or wherever where people can see it? We also want to improve our field technology, just like with our inspections. Having that iWork software out in the field is going to allow us to do these inspections better. It's going to allow us to provide a really clear printed out report as opposed to what we handwrite. There's a lot of things that we can improve there. And then one issue we've identified is that there's a lot of work that goes on in the community without a permit. And it's not just about, well, the city needs that fee, so we want to go after those permits. It's about that work hasn't been inspected, so we can't verify that it was done correctly and safely. It's also about protecting the livelihood of the people who are doing the right thing. The contractor who comes in and pulls a permit, or the tradesperson who went and got a license to do that work shouldn't have to compete with some fly-by-night, out-of-town person with no electrical license that'll come in and rewire your house for $50. It's a matter of fairness, and it's a matter of safety. And so this is that technology improvement program. We want to outfit the inspectors with the tablet, mount, keyboard, printer, software, digital code books, and the training to use all of that. And then we also want to install that public information kiosk at City Hall with access to those digital code books and the public portal for filing permit applications, checking on the status of permit applications, making complaints about code enforcement, all those things. We have some money already available for computers this year in the budget. As far as the public kiosk and some other aspects of this, we are looking at some grant opportunities as well. And then for work done without a permit, obviously education is a key part of that. Homeowners and some other people don't necessarily know that there's a requirement to get a permit before you put up a fence, and everything we can do to educate people on that better is going to help. We also have a requirement in the code, in a resolution. The code says that fees will be set by resolution, and we have the resolution approved that has a double permit fee or an inspection fee equal to the cost of the permit for when someone's caught doing work without a permit. And we need to apply that evenly, and we need to apply it in every case. In the past, we haven't kept that as a separate fee in the system, so I don't know how often we've charged that fee, but I know that it hasn't been in every case, and we need to charge that in every case. And then the fourth area I want to talk about was communication. We can use this meeting and the subsequent changes that we're going to bring to the council to generate public attention on the issue of code enforcement, and we can leverage those conversations to get more coverage from our local media. I'd like to create a calendar with media releases so that we know every spring the grass is going to start growing. That's when we need to push the message about cutting your grass. We know at this time of year, whatever it is, we know that this deadline's coming up or this issue's coming up, and we create a calendar where we already have all of that ready to go. We also want to issue releases and keep the public informed about major events when we have successes that we want people to know about, or when we have changes to processes that we want people to know about. We need to know how to get that information out, and we need to use our social media better. We also are interested in expanding the involvement of the Board of Health, like I mentioned, and emphasizing that we have the public portal available, again, at ottumwapermits.com. There's a lot of this information that people can directly engage with, and we want to make sure that it's presented in a useful way and that people know how to find it. This is an example, I guess, of what some of those seasonal types of reminders would be, and the opportunity to collaborate with Make Ottumwa Shine to work on some of this as well. And then organizational communication, I think, is one of the last pieces in this. We need to share our reports with the council. That's something we've tried to do with last month's reports and will continue to do. Also with other departments. Seek complaints from anywhere and anyone. And Chief Farrington had an idea in a meeting the other day that I think is going to really help us, which is he already has officers who forward us complaints that they see in the field. And his recommendation was, well, he'll tell those officers to send a photo as well. And that photo completes the initial inspection. Jeremy doesn't have to go out and make another trip to that address just to get documentation of the violation. He already has a photo, he opens a case file, and he sends a notice. That saves us time, and that also encourages the working together. And then, of course, just sharing our successes and collaborating on cases together as a staff is something that I think can make an impact. Just a couple of kind of closing questions, I guess. Does the level of interest in improving code enforcement match the level of support given to code enforcement? We only have 3 inspectors and 2 clerks that work very hard to meet the program's goals, but we have 11,000 dwelling units in the city of Ottumwa. So we'll kind of open it up here for the discussion of where do we want to go, how do we want to get there, and of course the public comment, public input.
Okay. Zach, thank you for putting the presentation together. Christine, thank you for assisting with some of that review. I apologize for anyone that's sitting out in the audience. The white on the blue was not as easy to read. This presentation is available on the city's website under the agendas and minutes section. So if you wanted to reference anything that was brought up in here, you can go there and be able to see that, be able to read it on your computer a little easier. So I apologize. I missed that when I was reviewing this myself. I didn't think of how it would look up here. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Mayor.
Thank you, Zach.
Your Honor, can we ask questions or talk about?
Certainly, the council is always free to ask any question they want. I was wondering if procedurally, though, it might be wise to give our audience a chance to make a few comments and hear the things that they think about in terms of nuisance and code enforcement, and then come back to the council with questions and comments. So at this time, if there's somebody in the audience that wants to share a story or give a suggestion, if you would come up to the microphone and identify yourself, we'll give you a few minutes to do that. We always cherish input from our citizens. Come on up. Identify yourself and we'll give you a few minutes to do that.
Hello, I'm Belinda Smith-Chigrella, and we're landlords in town, and we actually think the inspectors are doing a great job. You know, we were always really happy with how fair they are, and we really like them. So we think that they're doing a great job, and we always comply with everything, so it makes it a lot easier. But, you know, and then the police officers in town are so wonderful. The sheriffs are wonderful. They're fair, they're just, they're friendly. I mean, I think we have a great town. We have 2 issues that is going to send Ottumwa into smaller and smaller populations, and we're reversing who we would like to have in. And of course, anyone that owns properties, and I've spoken to landlords that they own hundreds of properties around town, and all of us have the same issue. Ottumwa, the city of Ottumwa, does one thing to push taxpayers out and push law-abiding citizens out, and then lure criminals in, and that's increasing property taxes. And the hundreds, I mean, our friends that have hundreds and hundreds of properties in town, I've heard them say over and over and over and over and over again, I'm not going to put new siding on because they'll just tax me more. The property taxes are so, I mean, they're obviously not real. They're falsely increased because 100% of our properties increase in value. No, they don't. But our property taxes are increased by 30%. One of our property taxes was increased by 116%, and it needed a new roof. You know, I mean, there's no, we feel unjustly burdened, and we're holding a lot of payments over our shoulders that we shouldn't have to do. And it's pushing us out. We have plans to sell 3 of our properties. We're looking into what other states to move to that have, and we're only looking for lower property taxes. That's our whole goal. And we actually have a lot of landlord friends that are doing the same things. So you're just pushing us out. The people that, I mean, we volunteer for the police, we volunteer for the, all of the charities, you know, we're good people and good citizens. And if we're constantly burdened, we're obviously not going to stay. And I mean, everyone I speak to feels the same way. All of us own properties and we were increasing, and we always want to improve our properties. You know, we'll buy something and then put it on the agenda to get new siding on it, but then we stop. We're like, oh no, that'll just increase more property taxes. I mean, that is just the absolute focus. But the inspectors do a great job. I think they point out things that we even miss, you know. I don't think that's the issue. I think the property taxes are the issue because like I said, we have wonderful police force, wonderful sheriffs, wonderful inspectors. Now, number two is when the landlords, who are the main people who increase and improve the value of the properties in Ottumwa, when we have issues, we don't have a way to streamline the law. So there are two laws that I would love to be able to see how we could enforce them faster. And one is the Iowa State Law 562A.27A. And that is where you can evict with a single 3-day notice for illegal drugs, illegal weapons, or assault on the property. And even though that's a state law, they don't seem to know much about it. If we could have the legal people figure out a way that's more streamlined, you know, because we try so hard to rent to good people, but I'm easily tricked by a smile, you know, and their kids are so cute. I just don't. Sometimes we're tricked, and you get bad people in there, and you don't know that they're bad until there's drugs or something, you know, and we would like to have help to be able to enforce the 3-day notice of eviction. And then the second law that Ottumwa City Code has, which is wonderful, but is also for some reason not enforceable, is section 20-8, and that's the responsibility of the tenants. And so again, sometimes we're tricked, and here we've spent, you know, $50,000 on a property and $16,000 fixing it up. And in 3 months, these people have destroyed our carpet, destroyed our walls, destroyed our toilets, you know. And there's a law on the Ottumwa City Code that says the tenants have the responsibility to keep the place clean. And it's very detailed. It's actually wonderful code, the way it's written. They did a really nice job, but there's no enforcement.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yep.
Is there anyone else who would like to step up?
My name's David McKenzie, and I live at 1303 Linwood Avenue. And I don't have a whole lot to say except from a citizen standpoint, the last few years anyway, nothing much has gone on. My big concern is a reduction in property values because of one bad person in a neighborhood. Or if you have a good neighborhood where people take care of things, one person can move in, and you know, if you get one bad actor, pretty soon there's two, and the whole neighborhood goes down. I'm concerned about the reduction in property values. Because of that, I have a good neighbor that is considering selling his property simply because one of his neighbors, a couple of houses away, is the property is in such bad repair, junk stored everywhere, and now the house between the two of them is starting to go down, kind of imitating the first guy. And he's really concerned that if sometime he needed to sell his house, that the property value would have gone down simply because no enforcement on the people that don't take care of their properties. And I'm not talking about not just mowing the grass. It's a lot worse than that. And I think most of you are aware of who I'm talking about. But anyway, that's my big concern. The other, listening to the presentation, I never heard anything mentioned about feedback to a person that makes a comment or a complaint, if you will. I will say the city's website and the place where you can put in a request for a change or whatever. I wasn't even aware of that until Holly Bird told me in an email that that was there. And I'll give you a good result for a change. I made a request for some potholes to be filled in the street. And the very next day it was done. I was amazed. But what I'm saying is that not enough people even know that's there. And I think it's a responsibility of the city to make our citizens aware that, those kind of opportunities are there. And I just couldn't get over I thought, well, yeah, okay, it'll be a week or two. Very next day, wonderful. So that's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. We appreciated your letter and your active involvement in the community. Is there anyone else who would like to step up? If you want to bring up something, now's the time to step up. We'll give you 3 minutes to make your comments.
Scott Bailey, a local landlord here in town. It was brought to our attention on one of our sites that a local landlord here in town has rented a property to a young lady under contract. And I do believe each and every one of you have a copy of her post that she had posted on the squatters' rights is what she's asking about. It's very detailed. And I would like to ask the council to ask the city attorney how this squatters' rights operates. This person that's given her problems is from the city of Chicago, has used the word legal aid, being advised by them, and that they're from Illinois, and he's a minor, age of 17, taking over her property. And it's very detailed in this as to how and what's going down in her words. If the council could ask the legal opinion from the city attorney about the squatters' rights and how this is working, I think this pertains to each and every one of us in this town and how it's going to affect our neighborhoods and the neighbors around us.
Okay, thank you. We'll take that under advisement and get some feedback from our attorneys. Is there anyone else? Now's your chance. And I would say it doesn't always have to be a problem. It could be a compliment, as some have made tonight. Okay, if there's no further public comment, then I'd like to turn back to the council and ask the council to bring up their suggestions, ideas, concerns, and talk to the staff and to our city administrator and to our city attorney. And we'll do this informally, but please, let's not step or drive over each other. So Skip, you had the first question. So Councilman Stevens?
Couple questions and maybe a couple comments. You're right, Zach, you don't have enough help. And I don't want it to seem like our inspectors aren't doing their job because they work their butts off and can't get anywhere. It's obvious. You don't have enough help. And I don't know what the answer to that is. Talked about citations back here. My question is, and maybe I missed it, but if a citation is issued because someone doesn't comply with junk in their yard, you issue a $250, the first one, $250 citation. It's not paid. And my understanding is there's no way to force these derelicts to pay them. I asked the question, can it be put on their property tax? And the answer was no. Now, how can you put a weed mowing bill on the property tax, but can't put the citation on there?
And it is possible, I guess the short answer is it depends on the violation and it depends on the citation. It is possible to include the legal description of the property if the violation relates to a condition of the property. And by filing a citation with the legal description on it, it does get filed with the treasurer's office, and you can assess the penalty against the property. But it also depends on how the defendant is served. So sometimes if they're personally served, then you can charge it against them personally and assess it on the property. If they're served by publication, if they're, hard to track down and we don't know where they are, and so we serve them by publishing in the newspaper, then you're only limited to charging it against the property. So it kind of depends on, what the citation is, how it's filed, what the violation is, how we're serving the defendant, but it is possible to charge it against the property in certain circumstances.
That's good to know. And I hope, Zach, that you can get that squared away so you can do that. A legal description is not hard to get. You know that.
Yeah. Working with Christine already has been really productive in this area. That their firm has a lot of experience with this, and some new possibilities have already kind of come to us that were things that we haven't been doing in the past that we're going to explore doing, and that's related to that.
Other comments or questions?
I got some more if you don't mind.
Well, let's go around so that everybody gets a chance to, and we'll just take in order. Bob, you had your hand up.
Okay. Well, Zach, excellent presentation. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
A couple of points you made that I listened to later, but through your presentation, I sure like the idea of your calendar idea, because I think that does or will give residents a lot of heads up on things. Another thing you mentioned was Chief Harrington and his officers being able to take pictures after you. Because the other concern that I hear a lot about is it is a violation, but who is it that's supposed to enforce it? So hopefully those kind of teamwork combinations will get down to getting good teamwork, and then who is the one that's supposed to enforce it.
I agree with you. And I think we've actually had some really great coordinated inspections just in the last couple of weeks. We had a restaurant inspection that we went out with the inspectors and the deputy fire chief on. It was a really great enlightening opportunity for me to be on that one. And then we went to we served a search warrant for a derelict property and nuisance case with the police department. And that was another great one where we coordinated together. And I think we had a really great outcome. And so continuing to build on that momentum, I think, has been encouraging. And we've been having a really good record in the last couple of weeks. And I'd like to maintain doing that because it's been great. Thank you.
Councilman Delby, any comments?
Yeah, I had a quick question. I just want to follow up with Mr. Bailey's request. Several years ago, my wife and I looked into purchasing a home. Seemed the price on the home was very low, and for what the pictures represent. So we called about it, and certainly it was crazy because apparently there were squatters had been in that house, and they had tore it completely up, and that's why the price was very cheap, and it was going to get repossessed, and blah blah blah. Went through it. So I am a landlord too, but I do have a curiosity. He brings up a good point. Could you give us just a little quick description of the squatter? I know there's something there because we were told that when we bought this house that squatters had been in, they couldn't kick them out. They were tearing things up, which also leads to nuisances and stuff in the city. So I think it's a legitimate, just maybe a short, quick, synopsis of what that law is.
So I guess, my preliminary comment is squatters' rights is not necessarily a legal term that is readily identifiable within Iowa law. However, what I would say is that Iowa is not a self-help eviction state, which means landlords cannot just go ahead and kick people out of property. You have to follow the eviction statute, the FED process, which is outlined in the code. You have to send a preliminary notice. They're entitled to a court hearing. You have to get the judge to order the eviction. Then you have to get the sheriff to enforce the eviction. So when people are talking about squatters' rights, I assume what they're referring to is that you can't just kick me out. You have to go to court and get the court order, which tells me I have to leave, and then the sheriff has to enforce that, or the police department. So that is my guess. There is something that's called adverse possession, where you can acquire title to property by essentially, squatting on the property and claiming that it's yours, but that takes years to be able to legally take property that way. So my guess is what these folks are referring to is essentially the FED process that, Iowa law doesn't allow landlords to just kick people out. You have to go through the formal court.
So it's the normal eviction process basically and taking time. Well, that clears a lot up. That solves my curiosity. I appreciate that.
I guess, so following up, I got a couple others too, but following up on that one first. So essentially, that's why I know in that, in the summer we got from that particular case in our email today, that's why the police themselves can't do anything because it has to be judge's order. So it's outside of what the city could do one way or the other.
Right, the police do not have the power to evict anyone, and if they were to unlawfully remove somebody from property that they claim they have the right to, I mean, that would be, you know, a constitutional violation, that's an infringement of someone's property rights, so that would, you know, the city potentially could face exposure there with that type of action, so yes, in my experience, if a police officer is called and it's some dispute about someone's right to occupy a property, their response is going to be, you have to go to court and sort that out. I can't do anything about that.
Okay, thank you. A couple other questions I had, which I've got a lot, but I'll do a couple now. Zach, I know Dave McKenzie had talked about how feedback after someone's made a complaint. When or could they, when someone calls the clerk's office, could they make sure they tell them about that, follow up the Ottumwapermits.com. That might be one simple way to kind of help keep them up to date. I know it's not like you know, there's a lot of phone calls.
Yeah, no, that
So-
was,
but
I was
yeah.
really appreciative of the comment because I hadn't considered that in putting this together. We're going to have to look at what we can do. I know that if somebody specifically requests a call back, we make a note on the file and we try to do that. As far as anything routine getting back to people, it is a lot of calls, it's a lot of cases. But that information is available on the public portal, and how we can do something more clear when people get complaints, make sure when people make a complaint, make sure they know where they can track it, that sort of stuff. And even if we can do more, it seems to me like it would be hard to call everyone, but we're going to take a look at what that would look like. But yeah, giving people feedback after their complaints was something I hadn't thought about, and I appreciated getting
Yeah,
comment.
and maybe just, you know, if we can't, I know it'd be difficult to call everybody, but at least let them know that website on the front end if they don't know, because I forgot myself.
Yeah.
So even though I've known about it, I forgot myself. So yeah, I think maybe just letting them know when they make that call, that might, or send an email, put that link in there on the way back might be one way to help reduce some of that. But yeah, get them that information.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm glad that we're talking about this. You know, since I've been on the council 5 years now, this has been like one of the most sensitive subjects. I know it's been a personal passion of Councilperson Stevens. This is really just a catch-22 that we're in as far as the code enforcement, because everybody wants enforcement, but in the 5 years that I've been doing this, it's a lot of the same people who complain the most about enforcement. As soon as you go to tell them that they're doing something wrong, then you're violating their rights. So, you know, but the problem in that is, you know, we don't enforce what we're supposed to be enforcing, which is why I think that we do need more code enforcement people. That way we can take care of it. You know, people compare Ottumwa, you know, why can't we be like Pella? Well, then we put some of the rules in place like what Pella had, and then all of us like the junk vehicles in the yards. Then all of a sudden, well, you're trampling on my rights. I can't have junk vehicles in my yard. Well, you were the person that asked for this. So, but anyway, that causes the properties to run down in value, forces people that are tax-paying citizens to leave. And, you know, a lot of it is, you know, we have a poverty issue here in town that and an aging population. They either don't have the ability or the financial resources to take care of the properties that they have. So I think that there's a lot of things that we need to take care of all at the same time. I guess my questions would be, number one, in looking at the enforcement of the violations, in some instances, we don't necessarily have the cooperation of the courts when we're handing out violations for this, that, or the other. Do we have the cooperation of the courts when we're handing violations for code enforcement?
I believe that the experience that I've had working with the firm that we work with now, I don't think that we've come into a situation where we've presented a case that we thought was very sound on the law, and the judge just was far outside of that in favor of an individual's property rights or against the city. That hasn't been an experience that I've seen us have. I think that concerns about that were applied to how we did enforcement in the past. And so we never tested that as much as maybe we could have, because it seems like the cases that we've had, if we're confident that we built a case that's sound in the law, we've won those cases, the 657A property cases, the citation cases. And I think, is that your experience as well?
Yeah, Olivia Brooks is actually the attorney who's primarily been prosecuting 657As and the city's municipal infractions. And I mean, in talking with Olivia, I think, you know, you're having good success and aren't getting pushback from the courts or anything. I guess I would invite you to provide any comments that you have.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I would agree that at the juncture that we've been with the courts, that we have a case that is strong, and the inspectors do a great job of documenting it, investigating it, preventing, you know, issues from getting worse, and then giving us information. It's at that point really easy to take to court and say, here's what happened, and then it's following the code that the court's looking at. So I think we've had really good luck with that, and it's been easy to work with the inspection department. And then from more of the prosecution side of the city code aspects in that regard, it works kind of similar to a simple misdemeanor of a traffic violation. So oftentimes, and at least in my experience so far, it's been more similar to individuals coming in, realizing what the fine is, and then just paying the fine. But there are a couple that I can think of that do kind of have that lingering process, and so that's something we're working on as well. But that's also been a pretty easy process too.
Great. That's good to know, because I'm sure at least you, Zach, can remember a couple of cases in the last couple of years that were blatant violations of city code, and the courts were not so friendly in working with us. So it's good to know that has not continued to be the case.
And I would just say anecdotally that in conversations I've had to go in for a search warrant or anything else with judges, I've never had any bad interaction. I've always heard, you know, it's positive that you're working out in the community on stuff like this. We like to see you come in and know what's going on, all those sorts of things. So I haven't gotten a sense that it's a hostile place to go to court.
If I may, Mayor, just real quick, touching on another point, is you kind of mentioned the poverty and the cost of doing some of the improvements. That's one side we didn't even really touch on tonight. And it may have been you're bringing this to the city with the neighborhood initiatives and giving some opportunities for people to apply for funding to help make some repairs to properties that they might not have otherwise been able to do. And we'll continue to work on those kinds of things. The capital plan last year, as the council's aware, we did put money aside in that so we can have some more community development initiatives and helping to assist those that they want to be able to fix their property but don't have the financial resources, and helping to offset some of that. So we have some other opportunities that wasn't even part of tonight necessarily.
That's actually good to hear. And if we can, I know that there was a pretty good message that was sent out last year about that program, but if we can continue that message going forward, because I think Mr. McKenzie's right in that you could have a bad property go viral in a neighborhood pretty quickly. So if we could, the people who can't necessarily afford or even have the help available, if we could offer the resources up front for them, that way that doesn't happen, that'd be great.
Councilman Stevens, you had some more questions?
Yeah, just a couple comments. Mr. McKenzie that spoke, sat there on the front row, is 100% right. I've been watching that property he's talking about for weeks, and I go by there 2 or 3 times a week. It hasn't changed. They even peeled the sod off the front yard. It's just a mud hole. It's in an area close to a new school. It just shouldn't be. And there is a neighbor that's thinking about trying to sell his house and move, and I don't know how he'd ever sell it. But anyway, that's a comment. Ottumwa seems to have several out-of-town owners of apartment rentals. And they don't put a dime back in them like you folks do that are here in Ottumwa. And I can think of one or two that are in a historical area. About every week, there's mattresses and garbage and stuff thrown out in the front. And how do you think that looks in that district? I don't think it looks very good, but it's been going on. I don't understand why that out-of-town owner can't be called and said, get your butt up here and clean this up or straighten this mess out, or there's consequences. And I don't know whether that's legal, but I would think it would be. There's two houses I know of right close to City Hall. They were bought to fix up, bought with a promise. We're going to start fixing it up within 3 months or 4 months. They're sitting there 2 years or better now, not touched. One up off of Court, the people next door have, I think, sold their home or trying to sell their home to move away from it. That shouldn't happen. You mentioned side yard parking. That has been an issue, and it was my understanding that you couldn't park in front of your house unless it was on the paved drive, but you could park, say, off to the side of the garage that's hooked to your house if the car was in good repair and you didn't create a big mud hole. So that's just a comment of mine. Over the years, I was a longtime city employee. I've watched some of these places, and I wish I could load you guys all on a bus and take you for a ride. You wouldn't believe what you see. I can show you 1 or 2 or 5 that have been this way for 40 years. And I'm not exaggerating one bit. 40 years degrading the neighborhood. That should never happen. It should be taken care of. Shouldn't take all that long. You can't believe how many realtors over the years that I run into at store or something. Why can't this mess over here be cleaned up? We got a home for sale over there. We can't sell it because of that. These kind of things that we're talking about tonight are killing Ottumwa. It's killing us. They bring people in, maybe to hospital or whatever, John Deere, whatever. They say, drive us through a derelict area in your community. Well, which one do you want to go through? There's all kinds of them. Drive us through your downtown. Thank God we got the downtown looking a lot better. It's not a bunch of junk now. It's looking a lot better. But anyway, those are just my comments. I hope that our attorneys can help us with this. This is much needed. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Skip.
And I just wanted to say quickly to some of that, that I've always really appreciated the feedback from Councilman Stevens on this issue. He's done a really good job of advancing attention to it, and that the staff has felt the same way for a long time, that it's really frustrating to come to work and tread water when you want to make progress. And we're optimistic that we're going to start getting going instead, because it has been discouraging in some of the cases that I know that you're aware of and we've worked on.
Good. Thank you.
Christine, can I ask a question about, is there some requirement that you have to give notice each and every time? If somebody is a known frequent flyer or a chronic problem, habitual, I think you used, why can't we continue that case and simply say by such and such a date it has to be fixed, or we're going to court? We're going, and not keep going back over this 2 week, a month, and then it falls back in disrepair.
So you can always go to court. And, you know, typically I know the city has its process where you send a notice, you give them an opportunity to comply, you know, you might give them an extension and follow that process and then go to court. There's nothing that says you can't go to court immediately. So that is always an option. The due process is because, you know, by getting a citation and having a court appearance, that satisfies due process. The due process requirement is really when the city is taking administrative action. So if the city is planning on abating the violation itself and then taxing the costs of that to the property owner or to the property, that's really where you have to have all your I's dotted and your T's crossed. You need a notice, you need an opportunity for hearing, you need, good information about how to abate it. So there are different avenues you can take depending upon the circumstances. As Zach said, there are some, city codes that allow for habitual violator violations. And I think that's something that we're going to be looking at to see whether that helps, to satisfy some of that. So that's certainly something that I know the staff is interested in.
And then also, Zach and Christine, is there some requirement? I mean, we talk about the $250 citation, $500, $750. Is there some reason we can't jump beyond that? I mean, some people say, I'll just pay the fine. Why can't we say we'll start it? I mean, and I have pictures of some of the places that people have sent me, and they're appalling. And so I'm thinking a $250 fine is nothing to them, especially if they're out of town, as Skip has mentioned, or people that say, I'll take my chances with the city. Do we have to go through that kind of structure?
So the city code identifies your fines. Can those be increased, and can they be increased for certain violations but not others?
Right.
Yes, the city could do that.
I guess I would also just say that I haven't had an experience where somebody just is rich and I don't care, I'm not going to pay, or I'll just pay the fine and let it stay that way. In part because usually when we file these actions, we're not in it for the $250. We're in it for that order from the judge to go in and abate the nuisance. And so we go in and we pick that up anyway. So I haven't encountered that attitude necessarily. I've also seen probably more in the direction of, well, $250 is so much that I could never pay it. And so then people just don't bother to pay it. I've run into that other side of it as well, to the point where I mentioned to Christine, well, I think it'd be nice to just go out and write a $50 ticket on site for some of these issues. And then that's within an amount that somebody might be able to pay, and then you just handle it from there. There's some issues with writing a ticket on site, and she straightened me out on that a little bit. But that was something that was closer to the experience that I had when I was doing those inspections. But.
And this is not a criticism, but it's a concern. Why don't we have tablets that you can take out? I mean, we buy equipment all the time, and a tablet on a notebook would be a couple $100. And
Yeah.
so you guys are out writing stuff down, and they have to come back here and write it again in another record. If it was a GIS system that would transfer through the entire system, and then police, building inspection, public works could look at the whole record, because sometimes we don't know what each other is doing.
Right, and Edward's working with us to get, to upgrade the computer so that the inspectors will have a tablet that has everything on their computer. It goes with them in the field, they bring it in, they plug it in, and now it's on their desktop screen instead. And we think that's just a better approach for them for what they can have in the field. And then as far as sharing our cases, we did create an account for the police department on iWork at their request. Any other department, we'd be happy to work with them on that.
Good.
We can have as many accounts as we want on iWork.
Yeah, and we have a number of employees driving the streets on any given day, whether it's police, fire, public works, anyone that can assist in this area and getting these cases cited. If you have the ability to take a quick picture, like I said, and get that case started, is an asset to the inspection crew.
Okay,
Mayor, I have
Council.
another question.
Go ahead, Mr. Mark.
Christine, and I appreciated Matt bringing this up earlier, but we were just doing one question. And then this ties in, I think, to Belinda and also Mr. McKenzie, but it's more directly back to Mr. Bailey's question. And I'm just curious, even though with Matt and your explanation of due process and how that takes time and everything, but in this Bailey case, if that's correct, that the young man from out of state, in fact, is 17, which you can't enter in a contract underage. Couldn't we fast track that one or not?
I don't believe the police department should be in the business of evicting people. I just think that opens up too much potential exposure for the city. Eviction is a civil process under the Iowa code, and it really, you have to go to court to sort that out. It's not something that the police department is, trained on or able to make those
Excuse me, I think you misunderstand me. I understand that about evictions, but I think it's a major concern if a underage person can come into this city out of state, and then we have to say, well, but the police can't evict. That's why I say, isn't that a legal matter that fast tracking to a judge that says, hey, that person doesn't have any legal standing? Isn't that different?
I mean, the way the eviction statute is written, I don't believe it is.
All right. Thank you.
Your Honor, I got another quick question here too before we
Go
move
ahead,
on too
Matt.
far. Belinda Smith-Chickarell brought up another. I think people that attend a council meeting, take their time to ask questions, should get, the best answer they possibly can. I know we don't have all the answers and may not be able to enforce everything, but I am curious about what you said there, Belinda. I looked at chapter 28, and basically it just kind of spells out for the occupant of a rental property or whatever, their responsibilities in keeping and maintaining the property. So scenario, say I'm a landlord and I notice that under section C here, extermination of pets, every occupant is responsible for an extermination of every pet. I'm just using this as an example. So I call up the city and I say, my tenants aren't, they got rodents, they've got an insect problem. Your code says they aren't to have that. What are you going to do about it? What would you respond? And I guess the answer here, it looks like to me, is we don't have the manpower to enforce 90% of this section. And I understand that. I mean, we're limited by what our budget, calls for, but maybe it's something we should look at. I mean, it is kind of confusing because I'd make that call and ask you what I need to do. What would you respond to me like? What would be your response?
I think that's a good question because the scenario is one that I've had when I was a building inspector. Got a complaint. I'm renting a house that's full of roaches, and I scheduled an inspection. The tenant, after some trying, let me in to do the inspection. I opened a closet door, and it was just a wave of roaches. It was ungodly. It was terrible. And we did give a notice that was to the tenant. Because that's what the section was. The responsibility was for the tenant. If you're in a big apartment building, you're responsible for your unit. But if the problem extends into the common areas, the landlord's responsible for the common areas, even if it was your fault. Our side of it is just who does the notice go to, who's responsible. If the tenants and the landlords have an issue that they need to go to court and sue who was responsible for the cost, that's all aside what we do. But we follow that. And so we try to say, is it the responsibility of this party or is it the responsibility of this party? A lot of times we'll write up our deficiency lists on rental inspections, and we will include items for the tenants, clean up the yard, replace the smoke alarm, or hanging back up the smoke alarm battery, because we see all the time where tenants took down the smoke alarms or took the batteries out, and we direct the responsibility for that to the tenants. Those are things that we do see. I do want to revisit that code and have a conversation with the inspectors about it and just make sure that we're fresh on it and what our responsibilities are with on.
Yeah, it's just curious to me in reading it. In my mind, couldn't figure out how would we enforce that. And so if I'm getting what you're saying is, so you assign the deficiency to either the occupant or the landlord, and then does it follow the procedure of giving them a due process of cleaning it up, getting it fixed, proving they have it cleaned up, and then does it follow the citation process, or what happens? Say you give them a citation or say you need to clean this up. Is there any follow-up?
Yeah.
How does that all work?
So it depends a little bit. When we do our regular routine rental inspections every 3 years, we produce the deficiency list. We give it to the landlord. There may be items on there that are for the tenant as well, and we will either give them a second copy or we'll ask them to work together on it. For the most part, the landlord kind of takes the point on that. But then after 30 days, the landlord will sign that all the repairs were completed, and they'll send it back. And the idea is that we spot check those sorts of things. We don't go and verify every single one of those inspections because we'd double our inspection load if we rechecked every one of those.
So even between the rental inspections, if someone were to call, say in the middle of the 3 years and say we have issues, you would still follow up on it,
And
try
we
to
treat
enforce
that
it.
just like any other housing complaint, and that would be open until closed.
Okay.
And so we'd resolve that either if we had to issue a citation or if that property had to be placarded. Those are all things that could come from those problems that we identify. One thing that would be an issue that thankfully I haven't specifically come up to yet is if a tenant has done something that makes a property uninhabitable by their actions, but once it's placarded, all of our dealings are with the landlord on that. And I don't know how that circle would get squared if we came to that. But if somebody, if that comes up, we'll have to work closely with the attorneys on that. But that's not that I'm specifically aware of. Not, we've had cases where tenants caused the property to be unlivable, absolutely.
Right.
Fire even. But we haven't had something where it was specifically things spelled out in that 20-8 or quite like that.
Right. Thank you, Zach.
So can I just ask one question on that? So basically what I'm hearing is you're going through the routine process for punitive action on the tenant like you would the landlord, but at the end of the day, if there's no action on the tenant's part, basically the responsibility still falls on the landlord.
Not
There's no
necessarily, no.
So
I
if I guess what I'm asking though is if the tenant does something that causes the placarding of the house, the tenant just moves on their way. They might have a fine that they're probably never going to pay, but the ultimate responsibility still falls on the landlord. There's no punitive action really available to the tenant unless it's civil on the part of the landlord.
That's probably true. And I guess if a tenant were to knock out the walls and then run away, the city wouldn't necessarily be involved in dealing with the fact that the tenant knocked out the walls. We would just have to deal with the landlord about getting it repaired. And then I guess would the expectation be that the landlord has to sue whoever this person is who's long gone? I don't know. I don't know if there's a better way we can do that. I think that's something that we need to make a note of and explore some when we look at that section too.
Do we have on our web page or Facebook page the fact that a vehicle has to be operable? It can't be junk or up on blocks in your front yard. I drove around this weekend and I was amazed at the number of wrecked, damaged vehicles I saw that obviously are not, even the motors were out in a couple and they're sitting up in the front yard. Why aren't we taking some action on those? Because once the word gets out that we're serious about this, other people will pay attention. But as long as we keep doing it, and this one, it's kind of like Skip. I know I got called last year on the same property on South Ward, and it's still there. You know, and so I'm not being hard on you guys, but I just want to know that there's some enforcement. And what do we need to do to clean up some of these? I mean, the one on Mary Street is another good example. They are adding more junk all the time.
Yeah. A vehicle up on blocks, a vehicle that is missing tires, flat tires, is missing 2 or more components that are essential to it operating. Those are the things that our code says now constitute junk motor vehicles. When we get those complaints, Jeremy puts the sticker in the windows, 10 days to get the vehicle out of there. And then we go through that file until it's closed. We're looking at tightening that, like I said, to include vehicles that haven't moved in 10 days, some more issues with how license is displayed, those sorts of things.
I have one picture here with 4 flat tires. I mean, you know, there's a point where. And
that would be a violation. We'd open a file for that, absolutely.
And I've referred those to your department, so I'm not giving you a hard time. I just want to be clear that we do have an expectation to have to be operable if they're in your driveway or in your property. Okay. Council, are there any other questions or comments you want to ask or make or?
I have just 2. I know it's not necessarily about housing nuisances, but when talking about junk, I know a lot of people have inquired about cleanup days. And I know that I've seen a lot of towns recently actually stopping those because of the abuse of said cleanup days. I know I was talking to Councilmember Dalby before COVID. He was working with a group on helping those who want to get their yards cleaned up, but maybe don't have the means, and having a volunteer group do that. So it sounds like he's working, not to, talk for you, but he's working on that. So I know that was something that people have asked about. I mentioned on the radio the other day, but I thought this would be a good place to mention it as well. I also started doing some inquiries. I haven't made a lot of headway yet because there's not enough hours in the day, but I've been talking to nonprofit organizations and seeing if we can do more partnerships for some of those at-risk houses that they don't have the abilities to do that. But what can we do? I've identified some grants, but we need the people power to head those up. As we know, our staff is running at full speed already. So if anyone's listening or in the audience that wants to help take on developing that further, I'd be happy to help as well. But definitely need some more people to take the lead on that to develop that further. It's something we've been talking about. We talked about it before COVID. Obviously, it kind of, came to a halt during that time. So happy to start working on that again.
Also want to compliment our staff that I know they'll be going to a state training here in May, and I think they'll have a chance to talk to other city representatives, find out what other cities are doing, because this seems to be a common problem throughout the state. It's not just here in Ottumwa. I'll allow one more comment. Go ahead.
I just wanted to agree with Skip Stevens that a lot of the apartments and so forth that are owned by out-of-state landlords or owners are the ones that have the least amount of repair. I want to point out the fact that a lot of out-of-state investors contact us often, I'd say at least once a quarter, to sell our multi-units to them. So, that's if we move because our property taxes continue to go up, that's who we will be selling to. And a lot of the landlords that I've spoken to, they get these same emails, these same calls. We would like to buy your multi-units. We would like to buy these. It's going to get a lot worse because all of us feel extremely burdened. And so the more property taxes go up, the more out-of-state owners are going to be owning multi-units here.
Say, Honorable Mayor, I just said quick comment. The property taxes is by no means lost on myself and other staff. For the first time in I don't know how many years, the tax rate did go down in the city here, and then also we're blessed to have the school district and county go down a little bit as well. So that is a positive. Staff was working very hard in efforts to reduce that and to continue to reduce that going forward. That's a target of ours, recognizing that as an issue. I also want to just make sure that the recent assessments that were going out, that is a process that is done by the county. And some of those jumps that we see, 30, maybe even more %, a lot of that has to do with they haven't been assessed in the 2 decades almost. It's been a long time since there's been a full valuation or full assessment done across the city.
Didn't they just assess it? Didn't they just assess it a few years ago?
There may have been some individual properties or things that were done, but not on.
And ask to look at it and the other property. This year.
This year?
Last year.
Okay, and that was, I'm assuming, is part of this. Yeah.
Well, and there is a process for citizens to appeal the assessment. That's done by the county. It's supposed to be done every couple of years.
And the point I wanted to make with that is when there is the full valuation like that, and you have it across the city, percentages going up, it's going to be a proportional factor if anyone's individual taxes were to go up or down as a result of that. So what we have is we have a total amount of dollars that the city needs to operate. And then the tax rate is going to be impacted by our total assessed value. So you get your dollars divided by assessed value. It'll have the impact of the tax rate going down as a result of that. Okay, so now that is, and I'll put out some more information. I don't want to take up the meeting here on this as far as how that whole process goes. I've been through valuations in a couple of places. That was not happening as a way to get more tax money from the citizens. I am fully aware of the importance. I live in the city, pay taxes myself here. So That was not meant to do that in any way. And just hearing some of the commentary, I want to make sure that we get that out there. And I would not want that to be a reason why people are not fixing up properties, fear that that's going to have the impact of raising the assessed valuations.
How many properties do you have?
No, I only own the one property. I'm not saying it from a matter of,
You get multiple times over here. Over and over. We're gonna sell to the people that you don't want in this town. You don't understand.
Purchase out of state because
We're gonna get rid of ours and we're going out of state.
well,
Do you want that to happen?
I will be.
If your house.
No, I'm sorry. This wasn't a matter of getting back and forth, but I will be happy to talk to you about this.
Yeah, let's not get
and
into
get the
it.
information. I want to stay this on the positive nuisance aspect that we're at. I just wanted to wrap up and say, I want to thank the staff that was here tonight. The agenda was put together in this way to kind of hit on the process that has been done. About a year ago, I was sitting in a meeting and I could tell then that the staff had passion for trying to abate the nuisances that were out there. There were different hiccups and things that were in the way, but their presence here tonight means that they still have the same passion to do right, to do a good job. And this was not meant to take away from the job they're doing, but to see what opportunities are out there to even do a better job with regards to that. And so thank you for coming tonight and thank you for the job that you do.
Thank you for all of your input too. We do listen, we do take it seriously. I think it's good to have some new legal eyes looking at some things. We're doing some things differently as a result, and hopefully things will continue to get better. Staff getting additional training, Make Ottumwa Shine Week coming up here May 16th, I think. We can all do something and talk to your children and your neighbors. I go out every day and pick up stuff, and it's amazing to me how many people just throw stuff out the car window. It's just garbage. And you know, McDonald's wrapper here or a cup, styrofoam cup there. Pretty soon, we've got a whole garbage bag full of stuff. So we all can do something. And I think if we all put that out to our friends and neighbors, we'll help the community look better.
I just want to add one more item on property taxes, which is that we do have, as part of the urban renewal plan, a universal tax abatement program. So if you make improvements over a certain value, depending on the type of property, up to 100% of that added assessed value can be abated for a period of time. And anytime that you're making improvements and you're curious, what's that program like? Call the planning department, 641-683-0606, and I'd be happy to work with you through tax abatement. We don't get nearly enough applications for that program. There's a lot more work that's done every year that could.
So that's
have
improvement, not
value
just
abatement.
new construction.
Yep.
Okay, good clarification, Zach. Okay. All right, is there any other business for city council that has not come up tonight?
Does the council know of any Ottumwa litter law that we have? You're talking about picking up garbage, the people coming in from out of town. I know seems to be the worst about the litter, is kicking it out the doors of their cars. As landlords, we have to send people's garbage out to the street when we send them out. I've had conversations, I talked to the city administrations and the departments. We don't seem to have anything. Growing up, I know a sheriff goes through the ditches and opens up the garbage bags and makes those people go back and clean up their litter. But we don't seem to have anything in this town that anybody can do anything about.
So I do know that it's a public nuisance to scatter litter. It is a public nuisance to dump litter. I've had my hands in bags of trash looking for people's mail so that I can find out who dumped trash before. I also believe that there's something in the public offenses section about littering as well, but I don't know. Maybe if Chief Farrington or somebody's.
I was going to say, Chief, can you make any comments?
How do we get the officers in the sheriff's department to pursue that, to force those people, the owners of that litter, to clean up their mess? Because the judges have given us permission to send them to court.
Usually what it is, it's like that, we have to go and start digging through the trash, and hopefully we can find, hopefully they're not a smart criminal, and they leave like mailings and items in there that we can then backtrack and file charges against that person. Work it with it.
Okay. Yeah, if you see somebody do it, get a license number, or if you know them, get a picture. I mean, everybody's carrying phones these days. It seems like that they can take a picture.
I'd like to get a little clarification on that adverse possession, because you can't get them people out there. Good rental contract, not only about, has all the tenants in it on purpose. So during an eviction, you can serve the people that are in there. And a good rental contract will have in there that you cannot have other people for 7 days. Adverse possession has to do with using a piece of property openly and notoriously for a period of time, like moved in for a week. I'm worried. I've been into that adverse possession, you know.
Christine?
Yeah, that's correct. As I said, adverse possession is something that takes years to establish. So that is not really what this particular complaint has to do with. It's more of an unlawful tenancy, which again requires a formal eviction.
And I think one of the things I know, Zach, this is unrelated but somewhat related, Zach has mentioned, if you know a house is placarded and somebody is in it, please call us. We don't always know that, but that's where a lot of fires are started. That's where a lot of people start gathering and do drugs. So if you know the house is placarded, call us. We'll follow up on it.
Even if it's placard, and they got water actually even do.
Well, we'll call on our attorney and find a way to get it taken care of.
So the placard does supersede some of those typical property rights because it's been declared unfit for
Unsafe.
human habitation.
Yeah.
And I guess what I was talking to with Chief Farrington a little bit in the meeting before this was that for our police officers and for our inspectors, when we come onto a property, you can't say it's your duty to show me your lease or we're taking you off of the property. The Fourth Amendment, the expectation is that we can't deprive you of your property. And so the police officers aren't going to be able to, at that moment, make you produce proof that you should be there. And so it comes down to that eviction process. And it does mean that it takes longer and it's unfortunate, but I don't know that there's a room for the city to be involved in changing it, unfortunately. And I know that it's a challenge for a lot of you. It's a challenge for us in other ways because of the outcome. What those people leave behind is more work for us, and we're aware of that too. But I think that's,
I say
we're
that
going to continue to look at it, but I think that's what we're looking at.
the best we can do with eviction process is make recommendations to legislators, but the landlords association is probably a more powerful lobby than what the city of Ottumwa could wager.
Okay, thank you all very much for being here tonight. Is there anything else, council, you want on future agendas or concerns? Let us know.
I would just say that the changes, Zach, that you outlined in your presentation, which was outstanding tonight, those look like some really meaningful changes, not just changes that, equipping our inspectors with tablets and being able to print on the field. Those are meaningful changes. That isn't just lip service. So I'd be looking forward as a council member to seeing those come about fairly quickly as long as we've got the funding. That's good stuff.
Okay. If there's no other business, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Councilmember Dalby?
Yes.
Councilmember Rowe?
Yes.
Councilmember Stevens?
Yes.
Councilmember Myers?
Yes.
Councilmember Berg?
Yes.
Thank you.
7:12.
7:12.
Well, we'll see what happens.